In the gentle mists of time, where legend and history intertwine like morning fog over ancient battlefields, there emerges a figure whose shadow stretched across the entirety of Europe and beyond. Picture, if you will, the Mediterranean island of Corsica in the year 1769, its rugged coastline kissed by warm summer breezes, its olive groves whispering secrets in the evening air. It was here, in this land caught between French rule and Italian heritage, that a child was born who would reshape the very foundations of the modern world. As you settle into comfort, let your mind drift to those sun-drenched shores where Napoleon Bonaparte first drew breath, his destiny as vast and unknowable as the endless sea that surrounded his birthplace. The Bonaparte family occupied a curious position in Corsican society, neither fully noble nor entirely common, existing in that twilight realm of minor aristocracy that would prove so formative to young Napoleon's character. His father, Charles Bonaparte, was a lawyer of moderate success who had aligned himself with the French administration following Corsica's annexation in 1768. His mother, Letizia Ramolino, possessed the fierce independence and practical wisdom that would echo through her son's later years. The household buzzed with the energy of 8 children, each destined for their own remarkable paths, but none would burn as brightly or cast as long a shadow as Napoleon. From his earliest years, Napoleon displayed the restless energy and keen intellect that would define his adult life. He devoured books with an appetite that seemed almost physical, consuming histories of great commanders and treatises on military strategy with the same fervor other children reserved for games. His mother often found him hunched over volumes far beyond his years, his dark eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight as he absorbed the lessons of Caesar, Alexander, and Frederick the Great. Even then, observers noted something different about the boy, a quality of attention, an intensity that seemed to burn from within. The decision to send Napoleon to mainland France for his education would prove one of history's most consequential choices. At the age of 9, he was enrolled at the Royal Military School at Brienne-le-Château, a journey that took him far from the familiar warmth of Mediterranean shores to the cooler, more formal world of French military tradition. The separation was painful for a boy so young, yet it forged in him the steel that would later withstand the pressures of empire. At Brienne, Napoleon first encountered the rigid hierarchies and elaborate protocols of French military life, learning not just tactics and strategy, but the intricate dance of authority and subordination that governed European warfare. His fellow students often mocked his Corsican accent and provincial manners, dubbing him the Little Corporal in jest, unaware they were christening a future emperor. Napoleon bore these slights with a dignity beyond his years, channeling his anger and humiliation into fierce dedication to his studies. He excelled in mathematics and geography, subjects that would serve him well in calculating the trajectories of artillery and understanding the terrain across which his armies would march. His instructors noted his exceptional memory and his ability to grasp complex military problems with startling clarity. As the seasons turned at Brienne, Napoleon's character crystallized like frost on winter glass. He developed the habit of solitary walks, during which he would replay famous battles in his mind, imagining himself in command, considering what he might have done differently. These mental exercises became a lifelong practice, a method of preparation that would serve him through countless campaigns. The boy who had arrived as an outsider gradually transformed into a leader among his peers, though he remained somewhat apart, wrapped in the armor of his own ambition. The completion of his studies at Brienne led to his admission to the École Militaire in Paris, where the future emperor would polish the rough edges of his provincial education. Paris in the 1780s was a city balanced on the edge of transformation, its elegant boulevards and magnificent palaces masking the growing tensions that would soon explode into revolution. Napoleon absorbed not just military knowledge, but the cultural sophistication of the capital, learning to navigate the complex social hierarchies of the Ancien Régime, while never forgetting his outsider's perspective. At the École Militaire, Napoleon's academic performance was solid if not spectacular, but his real education came from his voracious reading and his careful observation of French society. He studied the great military campaigns of history with the devotion of a monk studying scripture, paying particular attention to the campaigns of Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. He began to develop his own theories of warfare, emphasizing speed, concentration of force, and the importance of morale, principles that would later revolutionize European military thinking. The young officer who graduated from the École Militaire in 1785 bore little resemblance to the ambitious boy who had left Corsica years earlier. Napoleon had acquired the polish of a French gentleman while retaining the hunger of an outsider. His commission as a second lieutenant in the artillery marked the beginning of what would become one of history's most extraordinary military careers, though none could have predicted the heights to which this quiet young officer would rise. As you drift deeper into the rhythms of this story, imagine the France into which Napoleon stepped as a newly commissioned officer. The kingdom of Louis XVI was a nation of contradictions, blessed with natural wealth and intellectual brilliance, yet cursed with financial crisis and social inequality. The rigid class system that had governed French society for centuries was beginning to crack under the pressure of new ideas and economic realities. Enlightenment philosophers like Voltaire and Rousseau had planted seeds of revolution in the minds of an increasingly literate population, while the monarchy struggled with mounting debts and an inability to reform its archaic tax system. Napoleon's early military assignments took him to various garrisons across France, from the Mediterranean ports to the German frontier. These postings provided him with an invaluable education in the practical realities of military life, the endless paperwork, the politics of promotion, the delicate balance between officers and enlisted men. He used his spare time to continue his studies, reading everything from military manuals to works of political philosophy, gradually developing the broad intellectual foundation that would later enable him to govern as well as conquer. The young artillery officer's first taste of real military action came during the siege of Toulon in 1793, when the great naval port had fallen into the hands of royalist rebels supported by British and Spanish forces. The Republican government in Paris desperately needed to recapture this strategic stronghold, and it was here that Napoleon first demonstrated the tactical brilliance that would make his name immortal. Recognizing that traditional siege warfare would be too slow and costly, he proposed a bold plan to concentrate artillery fire on a specific point in the enemy defenses, creating a breach through which assault troops could pour. The success of Napoleon's plan at Toulon was immediate and dramatic. The royalist forces, unprepared for such concentrated firepower, collapsed within days, and the port returned to Republican control. More importantly for Napoleon's career, his performance brought him to the attention of senior military commanders and political leaders in Paris. At the age of 24, he was promoted to brigadier general, an almost unprecedented advancement for someone so young and relatively inexperienced. The promotion to general rank marked Napoleon's true entry into the turbulent world of revolutionary politics. The French Revolution had entered its most radical phase, with the Committee of Public Safety under Maximilien Robespierre wielding power through fear and the guillotine. Napoleon navigated these dangerous waters with characteristic pragmatism, aligning himself with those in power while avoiding the ideological extremes that had destroyed so many careers. He understood that in revolutionary France, military success was the surest path to political survival. As the Terror reached its climax in 1794, Napoleon witnessed firsthand the destructive power of unchecked political extremism. The sight of tumbrils carrying condemned prisoners to the guillotine left a lasting impression on the young general, reinforcing his belief that strong, centralized authority was essential to prevent social chaos. When Robespierre himself fell victim to the revolutionary tide, Napoleon watched and learned, understanding that in times of crisis, the man who could provide stability and order would ultimately prevail. The Thermidorian reaction that followed Robespierre's execution brought a measure of stability to French politics, but it also created new opportunities for ambitious military commanders. Napoleon's political connections and proven military ability made him a valuable asset to the new Directory government, which relied increasingly on military force to maintain power both at home and abroad. His appointment to command the Army of Italy in 1796 would provide the stage for his transformation from promising young general to military genius. The Italian campaign of 1796 to 1797 stands as perhaps the most brilliant demonstration of Napoleon's military genius. Taking command of a demoralized army that had achieved little success against Austrian and Piedmontese forces, he immediately set about transforming both its material condition and its morale. His first acts as commander revealed the psychological insight that would characterize his leadership throughout his career. Rather than issuing stern disciplinary orders, he addressed his soldiers directly, promising them glory, honor, and the spoils of victory if they would follow him faithfully. The geography of northern Italy provided the perfect theatre for Napoleon's revolutionary approach to warfare. The region's river valleys and mountain passes created natural corridors of movement, while its wealthy cities offered both strategic objectives and the promise of plunder. Napoleon studied the terrain with the intensity of a chess master analysing a board, identifying the key positions that would allow him to divide his enemies and defeat them separately. His strategy of maneuver warfare, striking quickly at one enemy before the others could react, would become his signature tactical approach. The first victories of the Italian campaign established Napoleon's reputation as a commander of exceptional ability. At the Battle of Montenotte, he demonstrated his gift for appearing where the enemy least expected him, striking with concentrated force at the most vulnerable point in their lines. The victory at Lodi, where he personally aimed cannons at the retreating Austrian rearguard, earned him the nickname Le Petit Caporal from his admiring soldiers. The same title his schoolmates had once used in mockery now became a badge of honor. As the campaign progressed, Napoleon's tactics evolved to match the challenges he faced. Against the methodical Austrian generals trained in the formal warfare of the 18th century, he employed speed and unpredictability as weapons more powerful than gunpowder. His ability to march his armies faster and farther than anyone thought possible allowed him to achieve local superiority in numbers even when outnumbered overall. The secret lay not just in his strategic vision, but in his understanding of logistics, the unglamorous but essential science of keeping armies fed, equipped, and moving. The political dimensions of the Italian campaign were as important as the military ones. Napoleon understood that victory in battle meant little unless it could be translated into lasting political advantage. His negotiations with defeated enemies revealed a diplomatic skill that matched his military genius, as he balanced the competing demands of extracting maximum advantage while avoiding the creation of implacable enemies. The Treaty of Campo Formio, which ended the first phase of the Italian campaign, was as much a product of Napoleon's diplomatic as his military talents. The wealth Napoleon extracted from conquered Italian territories served multiple purposes. It enriched France's treasury, reducing the financial pressures that had contributed to the revolution's outbreak. It rewarded his soldiers, binding them to him with bonds of gratitude and shared success. Most importantly, it demonstrated to the Directory government in Paris that their young general was not merely a military commander, but a source of economic and political strength. This wealth would prove crucial in funding Napoleon's future campaigns and maintaining the loyalty of his forces. As the night continues and your breathing deepens, let your mind drift to the cultural treasures that Napoleon encountered during his Italian campaigns. The cities of northern Italy, Milan, Venice, Bologna, were repositories of Renaissance art and learning, filled with masterpieces that had adorned churches and palaces for centuries. Napoleon's attitude toward these cultural treasures revealed another facet of his complex character. While he was quite willing to extract financial tribute from conquered territories, he also saw himself as a connoisseur and protector of art and learning. The creation of the Cisalpine Republic in northern Italy marked Napoleon's first experiment in political reorganization on a grand scale. Rather than simply occupying conquered territory, he sought to create new political entities that would serve French interests while providing better governance than the fragmented principalities they replaced. This approach revealed his understanding that lasting conquest required not just military victory, but the creation of stable, legitimate institutions that could command popular support. Napoleon's success in Italy made him the most celebrated figure in France, a status that brought both opportunities and dangers. The Directory government welcomed his victories and the wealth they brought, but they also feared his growing independence and popularity. His triumphant return to Paris in 1797 was marked by public celebrations that resembled those given to conquering Roman generals, a comparison that was not lost on either Napoleon or his political masters. The Egyptian expedition of 1798 represented Napoleon's most ambitious gamble to date. Ostensibly designed to strike at British interests in the Mediterranean and potentially threaten British India, the campaign was also a way for the Directory to remove their troublesome general from the French political scene. Napoleon embraced the Egyptian adventure with characteristic enthusiasm, seeing it as an opportunity to follow in the footsteps of Alexander the Great and establish himself as a world historical figure. The fleet that departed from Toulon in May 1798 carried not just soldiers and artillery, but an extraordinary collection of scholars, scientists, and artists. Napoleon understood that conquest of Egypt would require more than military force. It would demand an understanding of the country's history, culture, and social structures. The inclusion of the savants, as the scholars came to be known, reflected Napoleon's belief that knowledge was as important as firepower in establishing lasting dominion over conquered peoples. The landing in Egypt and the march on Cairo provided Napoleon with his first experience of warfare in a radically different environment. The desert heat, the unfamiliar terrain, and the exotic culture of Egypt challenged his adaptability as a commander. The Battle of the Pyramids, where his forces decisively defeated the Mamluk cavalry that had ruled Egypt for centuries, demonstrated his ability to adapt European military techniques to non-European conditions. His reported words to his soldiers before the battle, "Soldiers, 40 centuries look down upon you," captured the romantic and historical consciousness that elevated his campaigns above mere military expeditions. The destruction of the French fleet at Aboukir Bay by Admiral Nelson's British squadron transformed the Egyptian expedition from a bold adventure into a strategic trap. Cut off from France and surrounded by hostile forces, Napoleon faced the greatest crisis of his career to that point. His response revealed the psychological resilience that would carry him through later disasters. Rather than despair, he threw himself into the work of governing Egypt, using the enforced isolation to experiment with administrative and legal reforms that would later influence his governance of France. The cultural impact of the Egyptian expedition extended far beyond its immediate military consequences. The work of the savants who accompanied Napoleon laid the foundations for modern Egyptology, while their systematic study of ancient monuments sparked a European fascination with Egyptian art and architecture that would influence decorative arts for generations. The discovery of the Rosetta Stone, which would eventually unlock the secrets of hieroglyphic writing, symbolized the broader intellectual achievements of the expedition. Napoleon's governance of Egypt revealed his remarkable ability to adapt to local conditions while maintaining his essential strategic objectives. He cultivated relationships with Islamic scholars and religious leaders, presenting himself as a protector of Muslim traditions while introducing European administrative methods. His proclamations to the Egyptian people, written in Arabic and carefully crafted to appeal to local sensibilities, demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of cultural psychology that would serve him well in later conquests. The Syrian campaign of 1799, Napoleon's attempt to break out of the Egyptian trap by conquering Ottoman territories to the north, ended in frustration at the walls of Acre. The failure to take this seemingly minor fortress marked Napoleon's first significant military setback, though he characteristically turned defeat into a strategic lesson. The experience taught him the importance of sea power and the dangers of extended lines of communication, lessons that would influence his later continental strategy. As you drift deeper into sleep, imagine Napoleon's state of mind as he contemplated his position in Egypt during the summer of 1799. Reports from France spoke of military defeats in Italy and Germany, political instability in Paris, and growing discontent among the population. The Directory government that had sent him to Egypt was clearly failing, creating both crisis and opportunity. Napoleon's decision to abandon his army and return secretly to France was perhaps the most crucial gamble of his career, one that would determine whether he remained merely a successful general or became something far greater. The voyage from Egypt to France in October 1799 was fraught with danger, as British naval patrols controlled the Mediterranean. Napoleon's small flotilla slipped through the blockade more by luck than design, but his safe arrival at the port of Fréjus was greeted as almost miraculous by his supporters. News of his return spread across France with extraordinary speed, carried by a populace weary of military defeats and political instability. The general who had seemed lost in the deserts of Egypt had returned like a hero from legend, ready to save the nation in its hour of greatest need. The political situation Napoleon found upon his return was even more chaotic than reports had suggested. The Directory government had lost credibility through military failures abroad and economic problems at home. The various factions of revolutionary politics, Jacobins, moderates, royalists, were maneuvering for advantage, while ordinary citizens longed for stability and effective governance. Into this vacuum stepped Napoleon, his reputation enhanced rather than diminished by the mystery surrounding his Egyptian adventure. The coup of 18 Brumaire, which brought Napoleon to power as first consul, was both carefully planned and remarkably close to failure. Working with prominent politicians like Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès and his own brother Lucien, Napoleon orchestrated the overthrow of the Directory, through a combination of legal maneuvering and military pressure. The dramatic scenes in the orangery at Saint-Cloud, where Napoleon faced down hostile legislators while his grenadiers stood ready to intervene, demonstrated both his courage and his understanding of political theatre. The establishment of the consulate marked the effective end of the French Revolution as a popular movement and the beginning of Napoleon's transformation from military commander to head of state. His position as first consul was theoretically temporary and limited, but Napoleon's energy and political skill quickly made him the dominant figure in the new government. The other two consuls became mere figureheads as Napoleon concentrated power in his own hands through a combination of constitutional manipulation and personal magnetism. The domestic reforms Napoleon initiated as first consul were as revolutionary in their own way as his military campaigns. The creation of the Concordat with the Catholic Church, the establishment of the system of prefects to govern the departments, and above all, the promulgation of the Civil Code represented a fundamental restructuring of French society. These reforms reflected Napoleon's understanding that lasting power required not just military success, but the creation of stable, efficient institutions that could command popular support. The Civil Code, known later as the Code Napoleon, was perhaps Napoleon's most enduring domestic achievement. Drawing on Roman law, revolutionary legislation, and centuries of French legal tradition, the Code created a unified legal system that balanced individual rights with social order. Its influence extended far beyond France, as conquered territories adopted modified versions of the Code, and independent nations used it as a model for their own legal reforms. The Code's emphasis on equality before the law, protection of private property, and civil marriage represented a synthesis of Enlightenment principles with practical governance. As the night deepens around you, consider the broader European context in which Napoleon was consolidating his power in France. The continent was divided into competing coalitions, with Austria and Russia leading opposition to French expansion, while Prussia remained nervously neutral. Britain, secure behind its naval defences, provided financial support to France's enemies, while using its fleet to strangle French commerce. Into this complex diplomatic and military situation, Napoleon brought a clarity of purpose and unity of command that his enemies struggled to match. The campaign of 1800, which culminated in the victory at Marengo, established Napoleon as the dominant military figure in Europe. The dramatic march across the Great St. Bernard Pass, leading his army through alpine snows to appear unexpectedly on the plains of northern Italy, demonstrated his continuing mastery of the strategic surprise that had marked his early career. The Battle of Marengo itself was nearly a disaster, as Austrian forces initially achieved tactical success, but Napoleon's ability to recover from near defeat and snatch victory from the jaws of failure became part of his legend. The victory at Marengo had consequences far beyond the immediate military situation. It confirmed Napoleon's reputation as a general blessed by fortune, a man whose presence on a battlefield could tip the scales of fate. This psychological advantage would prove as valuable as his tactical skill in future campaigns, as enemy commanders found themselves second-guessing their own decisions when facing the master of European warfare. The battle also secured Napoleon's political position in France, demonstrating that his military genius remained intact despite the setbacks in Egypt. The Peace of Amiens in 1802 marked the temporary end of hostilities between France and its European enemies, providing Napoleon with the breathing space necessary to consolidate his domestic reforms. The peace was welcomed by war-weary populations across Europe, but it also created new challenges for Napoleon's leadership. In the absence of external threats, internal opposition to his increasingly autocratic rule began to surface. While his supporters wondered whether their leader could maintain his extraordinary position without the unifying force of foreign war, Napoleon's response to these challenges was characteristically bold and decisive. Rather than moderating his ambitions to accommodate domestic opposition, he chose to formalize his position by transforming the consulate into the empire. The elaborate ceremonies surrounding his coronation as Emperor of the French in December 1804 were designed to legitimize his rule through a combination of revolutionary symbolism and traditional monarchical pageantry. The image of Napoleon placing the crown upon his own head, refusing to receive it from the Pope's hands, captured the essence of his claim to power, authority derived from his own genius and achievements rather than from divine right or popular election. The creation of the empire marked a new phase in Napoleon's career as he began to think beyond the borders of France toward the establishment of a European empire under French hegemony. The continental system, his attempt to exclude British goods from European markets, represented his first systematic effort to use economic warfare on a continental scale. While the system never achieved its intended goal of bringing Britain to its knees, it demonstrated Napoleon's understanding that modern warfare required the mobilization of economic as well as military resources. The military campaigns that followed the renewal of war in 1805 showcased Napoleon at the height of his powers as a strategist and tactician. The Ulm campaign, which resulted in the surrender of an entire Austrian army without a major battle, demonstrated his mastery of maneuver warfare. By using speed and deception to position his forces between the Austrian army and its line of retreat, Napoleon achieved the complete destruction of enemy forces through strategic rather than tactical brilliance. The Battle of Austerlitz, fought on December 2nd, 1805, the first anniversary of Napoleon's coronation, was perhaps his greatest tactical masterpiece. Facing the combined armies of Austria and Russia, commanded by their respective emperors, Napoleon deliberately weakened his right flank to encourage enemy attack, then concentrated overwhelming force against the Allied centre when it had been weakened by the flanking movement. The victory was so complete that it effectively ended the Third Coalition and established Napoleon as the undisputed master of continental Europe. As you settle deeper into the gentle rhythms of sleep, let your mind drift to the atmosphere of triumph that surrounded Napoleon in the aftermath of Austerlitz. Across Europe, his name was spoken with a mixture of awe and terror, while in France, he was hailed as a new Caesar who had brought glory and security to the nation. The elaborate court ceremonies at the Tuileries Palace, the creation of new noble titles for his generals and administrators, and the systematic reorganization of European political boundaries all reflected his growing confidence in his ability to reshape the continent according to his vision. The campaigns of 1806 to 1807 against Prussia and Russia further enhanced Napoleon's reputation while demonstrating the flexibility of his military system. The twin victories at Jena and Auerstedt, won on the same day against different Prussian armies, showed how Napoleon had trained his subordinate commanders to operate according to his principles, even when he could not personally direct every movement. The systematic destruction of Prussian military power, culminating in the occupation of Berlin, marked the end of Frederick the Great's military legacy and established French hegemony over Central Europe. The winter campaign in Poland and East Prussia tested Napoleon's armies under the most difficult conditions they had yet faced. The battles of Eylau and Friedland, fought in snow and mud against determined Russian resistance, lacked the swift decisiveness of his earlier victories, but demonstrated his ability to achieve strategic success even under adverse conditions. The Peace of Tilsit, concluded on a raft in the middle of the Niemen River, represented the high point of Napoleon's diplomatic success, as he divided Europe with Tsar Alexander I and seemed to have achieved lasting security for his empire. The Spanish ulcer, as Napoleon himself would later call his intervention in Spanish affairs, marked the beginning of his decline. The decision to place his brother Joseph on the Spanish throne seemed consistent with his policy of establishing French satellite kingdoms throughout Europe, but it triggered a popular uprising that French military superiority could not easily suppress. The Spanish War of Independence, supported by British arms and advisors, created a drain on French resources that would persist for years, while providing Napoleon's enemies with hope that the apparently invincible emperor could be defeated. The nature of warfare in Spain was fundamentally different from the conventional campaigns that had made Napoleon's reputation. The Spanish guerrilla fighters, operating from mountain strongholds and enjoying popular support, could not be brought to decisive battle and destroyed in the manner that had worked against Austrian and Prussian armies. French forces found themselves controlling the main roads and cities during the day, while Spanish irregulars emerged at night to attack supply convoys and isolated garrisons. This war of shadows and ambushes tested Napoleon's military system in ways for which it had not been designed. The British intervention in Portugal under Sir Arthur Wellesley, later Duke of Wellington, introduced another complicating factor into the Iberian equation. Wellington's defensive strategy of fighting from prepared positions, while avoiding decisive engagement, denied Napoleon the quick, conclusive victories that were the hallmark of his system. The Convention of Sintra, which allowed defeated French forces to evacuate Portugal with their equipment intact, set a precedent for the frustrating, inconclusive nature of the Peninsular War. Napoleon's personal intervention in Spain during the winter of 1808 to 1809 brought temporary success, but could not resolve the fundamental problems of the Spanish campaign. His victories at Somosierra and his recapture of Madrid demonstrated that his tactical genius remained intact, but the demands of European diplomacy forced him to return to France before the pacification of Spain could be completed. This pattern of partial success, followed by strategic withdrawal, would characterize French efforts in Spain throughout the remainder of the war. The Austrian War of 1809 marked Napoleon's last truly successful campaign, though even this victory carried ominous portents for the future. The Battle of Aspern-Essling, Napoleon's first clear tactical defeat, showed that enemy commanders were learning to exploit the weaknesses in his system. The subsequent victory at Wagram restored his reputation, but the cost in casualties was higher than in his earlier campaigns, and the political settlement was less favourable than those that had followed previous victories. The marriage to Marie-Louise of Austria in 1810 represented Napoleon's attempt to legitimize his dynasty through alliance with established European royalty. The divorce from Josephine, his companion through his rise to power, was a painful personal sacrifice made for reasons of state. The subsequent birth of Napoleon's son, designated as the King of Rome, seemed to secure the succession and provide the Bonaparte dynasty with the continuity that had been threatened by Napoleon's lack of a direct heir. As the gentle knight embraces you more deeply, imagine the Europe of 1810 to 1811, when Napoleon's empire reached its greatest territorial extent. From the Atlantic to the borders of Russia, from the North Sea to the Mediterranean, French influence was supreme. The continental system seemed to be achieving its goal of economic warfare against Britain, while a generation of young Europeans was growing up under institutions shaped by French law and administration. Yet beneath this surface success, tensions were building that would soon tear apart the Napoleonic system. The Russian campaign of 1812 was Napoleon's greatest gamble and his most catastrophic failure. The decision to invade Russia was driven by Alexander I's withdrawal from the continental system and his increasingly independent foreign policy. But it also reflected Napoleon's belief that one final decisive victory would secure his empire for generations. The Grande Armée that crossed the Niemen in June 1812 was the largest force ever assembled under a single command, drawing troops from across Europe and representing the pinnacle of Napoleonic military organization. The Russian strategy of strategic withdrawal, avoiding decisive battle while drawing the French deeper into the vast expanses of the Russian interior, played to none of Napoleon's strengths while exposing all the weaknesses of his system. His armies were designed for swift campaigns ending in decisive battles that would allow them to live off the resources of defeated enemies. The endless march into empty countryside, with its logistical challenges and mounting casualties from disease and desertion, tested the Grande Armée beyond its limits. The Battle of Borodino, the largest and bloodiest single engagement of the Napoleonic Wars, was both a French victory and a strategic disaster. Napoleon's forces held the field at the battle's end and continued their advance toward Moscow, but the Russian army remained intact and capable of further resistance. The enormous casualties suffered by both sides, perhaps 70,000 men killed and wounded in a single day, demonstrated the horrific cost of Napoleonic warfare when applied on such a massive scale. The occupation of Moscow represented the hollow triumph of Napoleon's Russian adventure. The ancient capital lay empty and burning, offering neither the decisive political victory nor the material resources necessary to sustain the Grande Armée through a Russian winter. Napoleon's wait for a Russian surrender that never came revealed his inability to understand the psychological and cultural factors that motivated Russian resistance. His enemies had learned that they could defeat him not by matching his tactical brilliance, but by refusing to play the game according to his rules. The retreat from Moscow was a catastrophe of epic proportions, as the Grande Armée disintegrated under the combined pressures of winter weather, Cossack harassment, and sheer exhaustion. The crossing of the Berezina River, where Napoleon's engineers performed near miracles to construct bridges under enemy fire, became a symbol of heroic endurance in the face of overwhelming odds. Yet even this tactical success could not disguise the strategic reality that the greatest army in European history was melting away like snow in spring sunshine. Napoleon's escape from Russia and his lightning journey back to Paris demonstrated the personal courage and energy that had carried him through earlier crises, but he could not escape the political consequences of military disaster. The German states that had reluctantly allied themselves with France began to desert his cause, while the British government finally saw the opportunity to create a coalition capable of bringing down the French Empire. The man who had seemed invincible was suddenly vulnerable, and his enemies moved quickly to exploit their advantage. The campaigns of 1813 to 1814 showed both Napoleon's continued tactical brilliance and the impossibility of his strategic situation. Fighting against overwhelming odds with armies composed increasingly of raw recruits and foreign conscripts, he won a series of tactical victories that recalled his greatest triumphs. The battles of Lutzen, Bautzen, and Dresden demonstrated that his military genius remained intact even as his empire crumbled around him. Yet these victories could not compensate for the fundamental imbalance of forces arrayed against him. The invasion of France in 1814 brought the war to Napoleon's own territory for the first time since the early days of the Revolution. The campaign for France, as it came to be known, was perhaps Napoleon's most brilliant performance as a military commander. Operating with inferior numbers against multiple enemy armies, he used interior lines and rapid movement to achieve a series of tactical successes that amazed both his enemies and his own subordinates. The victories at Champaubert, Montmirail, and Montereau recalled the Italian campaigns of his youth. Yet military genius alone could not overcome the fundamental weakness of Napoleon's position. Paris fell to the coalition armies in March 1814, and even Napoleon's marshals began to urge him to accept the inevitable. The abdication at Fontainebleau marked the end of an era, as the man who had dominated European politics for 15 years accepted exile to the tiny Mediterranean island of Elba. The scene of Napoleon bidding farewell to his old guard in the courtyard of Fontainebleau became one of the most poignant moments in military history. As you drift toward deeper sleep, let your mind wander to the extraordinary drama of Napoleon's return during the 100 Days. His escape from Elba and landing near Cannes in March 1815 seemed like the desperate gamble of a man who could not accept the reality of his defeat. Yet the enthusiasm with which French soldiers and civilians greeted his return demonstrated that the Napoleonic legend retained its power even in defeat. The flight of King Louis XVIII and the rally of the army to Napoleon's banners showed that France had never fully accepted the Bourbon Restoration. The Waterloo campaign of June 1815 was Napoleon's last throw of the dice, an attempt to defeat his enemies separately before they could unite their overwhelming forces against him. The plan was sound in conception: strike at the British and Prussian armies in Belgium before the Austrians and Russians could arrive from the east. The execution, however, revealed how age and the stress of constant campaigning had affected Napoleon's once perfect timing and decision-making. The Battle of Waterloo itself was a close-run affair that might have ended differently under slightly different circumstances. Napoleon's tactical plan was reasonable, and his forces fought with desperate courage, but a combination of factors, the muddy ground that delayed the French attack, the steadfast resistance of Wellington's infantry squares, the timely arrival of Blucher's Prussians, conspired to produce defeat. The final cavalry charges of the Imperial Guard, repulsed by British squares that refused to break, marked the end of Napoleon's military career in scenes of almost mythic grandeur. The aftermath of Waterloo saw Napoleon's second abdication and his exile to the remote South Atlantic island of St. Helena, where he would spend the remaining 6 years of his life under British supervision. The transition from Emperor of Europe to lonely exile was perhaps the most dramatic reversal of fortune in modern history. Yet Napoleon faced his reduced circumstances with a dignity that added new luster to his legend. The memoirs he dictated to his companions on St. Helena became the foundation for the Napoleonic myth that would influence European politics for generations. The daily routine on St. Helena revealed new aspects of Napoleon's character as he transformed himself from military commander to historian and philosopher. His conversations with Dr. Barry O'Meara, his Irish physician, and his dictation of memoirs to the Count de Las Cases showed a mind still active and incisive despite the frustrations of exile. His analysis of his own campaigns displayed remarkable objectivity, while his predictions about the future development of European nationalism proved remarkably prescient. The gradual deterioration of Napoleon's health on St. Helena became a source of controversy that persists to this day. Whether he died from stomach cancer, arsenic poisoning, or the simple effects of a tropical climate on a European constitution, his death on May 5, 1821, mark the end of one of history's most extraordinary lives. His last words, reportedly, France, armée, titre d'armée, Joséphine, captured the essential elements of his identity: soldier, Frenchman, and romantic. The immediate aftermath of Napoleon's death saw the beginning of his transformation from historical figure to legend. The publication of his memoirs, the romanticized accounts of his campaigns by surviving veterans, and the growth of the Napoleonic cult in France all contributed to a mythologization that obscured the man behind the legend. The return of his remains to Paris in 1840, nearly 20 years after his death, demonstrated the enduring power of his memory to move the French people. The influence of Napoleon's legal and administrative reforms extended far beyond his military conquests. The civil code, the concordat, the system of prefects, and the reorganization of education created templates that were adopted throughout Europe and beyond. Countries as diverse as Germany, Italy, and the nations of Latin America incorporated elements of Napoleonic law and administration into their own systems, creating a lasting institutional legacy that survived long after the empire's collapse. The transformation of warfare that Napoleon brought about was equally enduring. His emphasis on speed, concentration, and decisive battle became the standard approach to military operations, while his integration of artillery, infantry, and cavalry into combined arms tactics influenced military thinking well into the 20th century. The concept of the nation in arms, which reached its fullest expression in Napoleon's later campaigns, foreshadowed the total wars of the modern era and marked the end of the limited dynastic conflicts that had characterized 18th century warfare. As the gentle night deepens around you, consider the broader historical significance of Napoleon's career. He stood at the intersection of the old world and the new, embodying both the rational ideals of the Enlightenment and the romantic spirit that would dominate the 19th century. His rise from obscure Corsican origins to master of Europe demonstrated the possibilities of individual achievement in an age of social transformation, while his ultimate defeat illustrated the limits of personal ambition when confronted with the forces of nationalism and coalition warfare. The economic impact of the Napoleonic period was as significant as its political and military consequences. The continental system, despite its ultimate failure, accelerated the development of European industry by protecting domestic manufacturers from British competition. The massive government spending required to maintain Napoleon's armies stimulated economic growth, while also contributing to the development of modern financial institutions. The plunder of conquered territories, while morally questionable, provided France with the capital necessary to fund infrastructure projects and educational reforms that would benefit the nation for generations. The cultural influence of the Napoleonic period extended into literature, art, and music, as the Romantic movement found in Napoleon's career the perfect embodiment of its ideals. Writers like Chateaubriand, Stendhal, and later Victor Hugo drew inspiration from the dramatic reversals of the Napoleonic era, while painters like Jacques-Louis David and Antoine-Jean Gros created iconic images that shaped how future generations would remember the emperor. The cult of Napoleon that emerged in the decades following his death became an integral part of French national identity. The impact of Napoleon's career on the development of modern nationalism cannot be overstated. His reorganization of the map of Europe, breaking down ancient dynastic boundaries and creating new political entities based on linguistic and cultural identities, accelerated the process of national awakening that would dominate European politics throughout the 19th century. The resistance movements that emerged in Spain, Germany, and Russia during the Napoleonic Wars became models for later national liberation struggles. The administrative and educational reforms that Napoleon implemented had consequences that extended far beyond his own lifetime. The establishment of the University of France created a centralized educational system that emphasized merit over birth, while the École Polytechnique and other specialized institutions trained the engineers and administrators who would modernize not just France, but much of Europe. The prefectural system provided a model for efficient provincial administration that was adopted by governments across the continent. The religious policy of the Napoleonic period, embodied in the Concordat with Pope Pius VII, established a framework for church-state relations that influenced European politics for generations. Napoleon's pragmatic approach to religious questions, seeking to harness the moral authority of the church while maintaining the supremacy of the state, provided a template for dealing with the role of religion in modern society. The eventual breakdown of the Napoleonic religious settlement contributed to the cultural wars that would divide European societies in the later 19th century. As you drift deeper into peaceful slumber, let your thoughts turn to the personal dimension of Napoleon's story. Behind the public figure of the emperor and conqueror lay a man of remarkable complexity, capable of both great tenderness and ruthless ambition. His correspondence with Josephine reveals a passionate romantic nature that contrasted sharply with his public image as a calculating political operator. His relationships with his family, particularly his complex feelings toward his brothers, who often disappointed him as rulers of satellite kingdoms, showed the human cost of his imperial ambitions. The loneliness that characterized Napoleon's later years, particularly during his exile on St. Helena, reflected the price of his extraordinary achievements. Surrounded by a small circle of devoted followers but cut off from the centers of power and decision-making that had given meaning to his life, he faced the ultimate isolation of the fallen Titan. His conversations with his companions during these final years revealed a man still capable of profound insights into human nature and historical processes, even as his physical powers declined. The medical mysteries surrounding Napoleon's death have fascinated historians and scientists for generations. The symptoms described by his physicians, stomach pain, nausea, weakness, were consistent with several possible causes, from stomach cancer to arsenic poisoning to hepatitis. Modern forensic analysis of hair samples has provided conflicting evidence, while the absence of a proper autopsy has left room for speculation. Perhaps the exact cause matters less than the symbolic significance of his death in exile, cut off from the France he had served and the Europe he had dominated. The legend of Napoleon that emerged in the decades following his death was as powerful a force in European politics as the man himself had been during his lifetime. The publication of the Memorial de Sainte-Hélène, based on Las Casas's conversations with the exiled emperor, presented a sanitized version of his career that emphasized his role as a champion of popular sovereignty and national independence. This romanticized image contributed to the rise of Bonapartism as a political movement that would influence French politics throughout the 19th century. The return of Napoleon's remains to France in 1840, orchestrated by King Louis-Philippe as a means of strengthening his own legitimacy, demonstrated the enduring power of the Napoleonic legend. The elaborate ceremonies surrounding the reburial in the Invalides were witnessed by hundreds of thousands of Parisians, many of whom had no personal memory of the emperor, but had been raised on stories of his greatness. The tomb itself, with its massive red porphyry sarcophagus, became a pilgrimage site for those seeking to connect with the glory of the French past. The influence of Napoleon's military innovations extended well beyond his own era. His system of corps organization, which provided flexibility and speed of movement, was adopted by armies throughout Europe and remained standard practice well into the 20th century. His emphasis on the moral factors in warfare, the importance of morale, leadership, and the will to victory influenced military theorists from Clausewitz to the present day. The cult of the offensive that characterized European military thinking in the early 20th century can be traced directly to Napoleon's emphasis on aggressive, decisive action. The economic legacy of the Napoleonic period was complex and contradictory. While the continental system ultimately failed to bring Britain to its knees, it did accelerate the development of European industry and contributed to the early stages of the Industrial Revolution on the continent. The massive government spending required to maintain Napoleon's armies created markets for manufactured goods, while also contributing to inflation and financial instability. The plunder of conquered territories, while providing short-term benefits to France, created long-term resentments that would complicate European politics for generations. The legal legacy of Napoleon's reign was perhaps his most enduring achievement. The Civil Code, with its emphasis on equality before the law, protection of private property, and civil marriage, became the foundation for legal systems throughout Europe and beyond. The Code's influence can be seen in the legal systems of countries as diverse as Italy, Germany, Japan, and the nations of Latin America. Its emphasis on written law and systematic organization provided a model for legal modernization that was adopted by reformers around the world. As the night grows deeper and your breathing becomes more regular, consider the broader historical context in which Napoleon's career unfolded. He was both a product of the Enlightenment and a harbinger of the modern age, embodying the rational ideals of the 18th century, while foreshadowing the nationalism and romanticism that would characterize the 19th. His rise from obscurity to world dominance illustrated the possibilities of individual achievement in an age of social transformation, while his ultimate defeat demonstrated the limits of personal ambition when confronted with the forces of popular resistance and coalition warfare. The diplomatic legacy of the Napoleonic period was equally significant. The Congress of Vienna, which met to reorganize Europe after Napoleon's defeat, established principles of international relations that would govern European politics for generations. The concept of the balance of power, the legitimacy of dynastic claims, and the importance of international law all found expression in the Vienna settlement. Yet the very need for such a comprehensive reorganization demonstrated the extent to which Napoleon had disrupted the traditional order of European politics. The social changes that occurred during the Napoleonic period were as important as the political and military ones. The careers open to talent principle that Napoleon embodied and promoted led to a significant increase in social mobility throughout Europe. The traditional barriers between social classes were weakened by the demands of warfare and the need for competent administrators and military officers. The rise of a professional middle class, trained in the technical skills required by modern government and industry, created new social dynamics that would influence European society for generations. The impact of Napoleon's career on the development of modern historical consciousness cannot be overlooked. His systematic approach to documenting his campaigns, his careful attention to his historical reputation, and his active participation in creating his own legend all reflected a modern understanding of the importance of historical narrative in shaping political legitimacy. The memoirs and histories that emerged from the Napoleonic period established new standards for historical writing, while also demonstrating the power of historical myth in political mobilization. The technological innovations that emerged during the Napoleonic period, driven by the demands of warfare, had consequences that extended far beyond the battlefield. Improvements in metallurgy, engineering, and transportation that were originally developed for military purposes found civilian applications that contributed to the Industrial Revolution. The telegraph, the railway, and the steamship all had their origins in the technological challenges posed by Napoleon's continental warfare. The educational reforms that Napoleon implemented had lasting consequences for European intellectual development. The establishment of the University of France, with its emphasis on centralized control and standardized curricula, provided a model for national educational systems that was adopted throughout Europe. The École Polytechnique and other specialized institutions created new standards for technical education that influenced the development of engineering and scientific research for generations. The religious and cultural policies of the Napoleonic period reflected the complex relationship between tradition and modernity that characterized the era. Napoleon's pragmatic approach to religious questions, seeking to harness the moral authority of traditional institutions while maintaining the supremacy of secular government, provided a framework for dealing with the role of religion in modern society. His patronage of the arts and sciences, while serving his own political purposes, also contributed to the cultural flowering that characterized the early 19th century. As you drift toward the deepest levels of sleep, let your mind wander through the vast landscape of Napoleon's influence on the modern world. From the legal codes that still govern much of Europe, to the national boundaries that emerged from his conquests, from the military tactics that shaped warfare for generations, to the romantic ideals that inspired artists and writers, his legacy touches virtually every aspect of modern life. The man who began as an obscure artillery officer on a Mediterranean island became the architect of the modern European state system. The final saga of Napoleon's influence unfolded in the decades and centuries following his death. The Bonaparte family, scattered across Europe and America, carried forward the Napoleonic tradition in various forms. Napoleon III's rise to power in France in 1852 represented the triumph of the Napoleonic legend over the restored Bourbon monarchy, while the various Bonaparte pretenders who emerged throughout the 19th century demonstrated the continuing appeal of the Napoleonic mystique. The scholarly reassessment of Napoleon's career that began in the late 19th century revealed both the complexity of his achievements and the ambiguity of his legacy. Historians began to move beyond the simple dichotomy of Napoleon as either hero or villain, recognizing him as a figure who embodied both the progressive ideals of his age and the authoritarian tendencies that would characterize much of modern politics. This more nuanced understanding has continued to evolve as new sources become available and new historical perspectives emerge. The global impact of Napoleon's career became increasingly apparent as the 19th and 20th centuries unfolded. His influence on the development of modern nationalism provided a model for independence movements throughout the world, while his administrative and legal reforms were adopted by countries seeking to modernize their institutions. The Code Napoleon became the foundation for legal systems in Africa, Asia, and the Americas, while his educational reforms influenced the development of public education systems around the world. The military legacy of Napoleon continued to influence warfare well into the 20th century. His emphasis on speed, concentration, and decisive battle provided the intellectual foundation for the German military doctrine that would dominate European warfare through 2 world wars. The concept of the nation in arms that reached its fullest expression in Napoleon's later campaigns foreshadowed the total wars of the modern era and marked the end of the limited, dynastic conflicts that had characterized earlier periods. The economic principles that emerged from the Napoleonic period, particularly the understanding of the relationship between government spending and economic growth, influenced the development of modern economic theory. The continental system, despite its ultimate failure, demonstrated both the possibilities and the limitations of economic warfare, while the massive government expenditures required to maintain Napoleon's armies provided early examples of the stimulative effects of public spending on economic development. The cultural influence of Napoleon's career extended into virtually every area of human expression. The Romantic movement that dominated 19th century literature, art, and music found in Napoleon's rise and fall the perfect embodiment of its ideals of individual achievement and tragic destiny. Writers from Goethe to Tolstoy grappled with the meaning of his career, while painters and sculptors created images that shaped how future generations would remember the emperor and his age. The political legacy of Napoleon's career was equally complex and enduring. His transformation of the map of Europe, breaking down ancient dynastic boundaries and creating new political entities based on linguistic and cultural identities, accelerated the process of national awakening that would dominate European politics throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. The resistance movements that emerged during the Napoleonic Wars became models for later national liberation struggles, while the administrative and legal reforms he implemented provided templates for political modernization that were adopted around the world. The personal dimension of Napoleon's legacy lies in the example he provided of individual achievement in an age of social transformation. His rise from obscure origins to master of Europe demonstrated the possibilities of merit and ambition in an age when traditional barriers were breaking down. Yet his ultimate defeat and lonely exile also illustrated the limits of personal ambition when confronted with the forces of popular resistance and coalition warfare. The man who had seemed to transcend the normal boundaries of human achievement ultimately proved subject to the same historical forces that govern the lives of ordinary mortals. The philosophical dimensions of Napoleon's legacy emerged most clearly in the decades following his death, as thinkers across Europe grappled with the meaning of his extraordinary career. The German philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel saw in Napoleon the embodiment of the world spirit, a figure who advanced the course of human history through the force of his individual will. This Hegelian interpretation influenced generations of political theorists and historians who sought to understand how individual agency intersects with historical necessity in shaping the destiny of nations. The Napoleonic model of leadership became a template that would be studied and emulated by political figures throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. The combination of charismatic authority, administrative efficiency, and military genius that Napoleon embodied appealed to leaders seeking to modernize their societies while maintaining centralized control. From Simón Bolívar in South America to Otto von Bismarck in Germany, from Mustafa Kemal Ataturk in Turkey to modern political leaders around the world, Napoleon's example provided both inspiration and cautionary lessons about the possibilities and perils of transformational leadership. As the night deepens around you and your consciousness drifts toward peaceful rest, consider the profound impact that Napoleon's career had on the development of modern historical consciousness. His systematic approach to documenting his campaigns, his careful cultivation of his public image, and his active participation in shaping his own historical narrative established new precedents for how political leaders engage with history and memory. The elaborate tomb in the Invalides, with its carefully orchestrated symbolism and magnificent architectural setting, represents not just a burial place, but a shrine to the power of historical myth in modern political culture. The technological innovations that emerged during the Napoleonic period laid crucial foundations for the Industrial Revolution that would transform European society in the 19th century. The demands of warfare on an unprecedented scale drove advances in metallurgy, engineering, and manufacturing that found civilian applications long after the guns fell silent. The development of improved road networks, originally constructed for military purposes, facilitated commercial growth and cultural exchange that helped bind European nations together, even as political boundaries shifted. The standardization of weights and measures that Napoleon promoted across his empire created the technical prerequisites for the integrated European economy that would emerge in later centuries. The literary and artistic legacy of the Napoleonic period extended far beyond the immediate romanticization of the emperor's career. The epic scope of his story, with its themes of rise and fall, ambition and destiny, provided a narrative template that influenced writers and artists for generations. The concept of the Byronic hero, with his combination of nobility and tragic flaw, drew heavily on the Napoleonic example, while the historical novel as a literary form was deeply influenced by the dramatic events of the Napoleonic era. Authors from Walter Scott to Leo Tolstoy found in Napoleon's career a lens through which to examine the relationship between individual will and historical forces. The educational revolution that Napoleon initiated had consequences that extended far beyond France's borders. His establishment of a merit-based system of advancement, symbolized by the École Polytechnique and other specialized institutions, challenged traditional aristocratic privileges and created new pathways for social mobility based on talent and achievement. This meritocratic ideal, though imperfectly realized in Napoleon's own time, became a cornerstone of modern democratic societies and influenced educational reform movements around the world. The standardization of curricula, the emphasis on technical training, and the integration of theoretical knowledge with practical application all became hallmarks of modern educational systems. The religious dimensions of Napoleon's legacy were particularly complex, reflecting his pragmatic approach to the role of faith in modern society. The Concordat he negotiated with Pope Pius VII established a framework for church-state relations that influenced European politics for generations, while his generally tolerant attitude toward religious minorities provided a model for pluralistic societies. His recognition of Judaism as an official religion in France, formalized through the creation of consistories and the convening of the Great Sanhedrin, marked a crucial step in the emancipation of European Jewry and the development of modern concepts of religious freedom. As you drift deeper into the gentle embrace of sleep, let your thoughts turn to the urban planning and architectural legacy that Napoleon left across Europe. The grand boulevards of Paris, the Arc de Triomphe, and the systematic reorganization of urban spaces according to rational principles influenced city planning throughout the continent. The concept of the modern capital city, with its ceremonial spaces, efficient transportation networks, and carefully planned residential districts, owed much to Napoleonic innovations. Cities from St. Petersburg to Rome bear the mark of planning principles that emerged during the Napoleonic period, creating urban environments that balanced grandeur with functionality. The diplomatic precedents established during the Napoleonic period continued to influence international relations long after his defeat. The Congress of Vienna, convened to reorganize Europe after Napoleon's fall, established principles of international law and diplomatic protocol that remained influential well into the 20th century. The concept of the balance of power, the recognition of spheres of influence, and the importance of international cooperation in maintaining peace all emerged from the experience of confronting Napoleonic hegemony. Even the United Nations and other modern international organizations can trace some of their institutional DNA to the diplomatic innovations of the post-Napoleonic settlement. The economic theories that emerged from analysis of the Napoleonic period influenced the development of modern economic thought in fundamental ways. The continental system, despite its ultimate failure, demonstrated both the possibilities and the limitations of economic warfare, while also revealing the interconnected nature of European commerce. The relationship between government spending and economic growth, so clearly illustrated by the massive expenditures required to maintain Napoleon's armies, provided early insights into the principles that would later be formalized in Keynesian economics. The role of state intervention in economic development, a central feature of Napoleonic administration, became a key element in debates about the proper relationship between government and market forces. The scientific and intellectual advancement that occurred during the Napoleonic period was equally significant. The expedition to Egypt, with its accompanying corps of scholars and scientists, established new standards for archaeological and scientific research that influenced scholarly methodology for generations. The systematic study of ancient civilizations that began with Napoleon's savants laid the groundwork for modern archaeology and anthropology, while the technological innovations driven by military necessity contributed to advances in physics, chemistry, and engineering. The École Polytechnique became a model for technical education that was emulated throughout Europe and beyond. The medical advances that emerged from treating the massive casualties of Napoleonic warfare contributed significantly to the development of modern medicine. The work of Dominique Jean Leray, Napoleon's chief surgeon, in developing new techniques for battlefield medicine and the rapid treatment of wounds, saved countless lives and established principles of military medicine that remained influential through subsequent conflicts. The systematic study of disease patterns in Napoleon's armies contributed to the development of epidemiology, while the challenges of maintaining health in diverse climates and conditions advanced understanding of tropical medicine and preventive care. As the night continues its gentle embrace, drawing you deeper into peaceful rest, consider the profound impact that Napoleon's career had on the development of modern concepts of citizenship and national identity. His transformation of the French revolutionary slogan, liberty, equality, fraternity, from abstract ideals into concrete legal and administrative reality, provided a template for democratic movements throughout Europe and beyond. The idea that government should serve the interests of all citizens rather than a privileged elite, though imperfectly realized in Napoleon's own authoritarian system, became a cornerstone of modern democratic theory. The transformation of warfare that Napoleon brought about had consequences that extended far beyond his own era. His integration of different military branches into coordinated combined arms operations, his emphasis on speed and maneuver over static defense, and his understanding of the importance of logistics and communication in modern warfare all became standard elements of military doctrine. The concept of total war, which reached its fullest expression in Napoleon's later campaigns, foreshadowed the global conflicts of the 20th century and marked the end of the limited dynastic wars that had characterized earlier periods. The linguistic and cultural influence of the Napoleonic period was equally far-reaching. The spread of French as the language of diplomacy and high culture throughout Europe was accelerated by Napoleon's conquests, while his administrative reforms introduced French legal and political terminology into languages across the continent. The romanticization of Napoleon's career in literature, opera, and visual arts created a shared European cultural vocabulary that transcended national boundaries and contributed to the development of a common European cultural identity. The psychological impact of Napoleon's career on European consciousness was perhaps his most enduring legacy. The demonstration that an individual of humble origins could rise to dominate the continent challenged traditional assumptions about social hierarchy and divine right, while his ultimate defeat illustrated the power of popular resistance and coalition warfare. This dual lesson, the possibilities of individual achievement and the limits of personal ambition, became a central theme in European political thought and influenced reform movements throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. The feminist dimensions of Napoleon's legacy were complex and contradictory. While his legal codes generally reinforced traditional gender roles and limited women's legal rights, his meritocratic ideals and the social upheaval of the Napoleonic period created new opportunities for exceptional women to achieve prominence. Figures like Germaine de Staël, who opposed Napoleon politically while acknowledging his intellectual brilliance, and the various salonières who shaped cultural discourse during his reign, demonstrated the possibilities for female influence even within the constraints of early 19th century society. The colonial and global implications of Napoleon's career were equally significant. His sale of Louisiana to the United States fundamentally altered the geopolitical balance in North America, while his intervention in Haiti and the subsequent independence of that island nation established precedents for anti-colonial resistance that would resonate throughout the developing world. The administrative and legal models that Napoleon developed were later adapted by European colonial powers for governing overseas territories, while his military innovations influenced independence movements from Latin America to Asia. As you sink deeper into the peaceful rhythms of sleep, let your mind drift to the artistic and cultural treasures that Napoleon assembled during his campaigns. The Louvre Museum, transformed under his patronage from a royal palace into the world's first truly public art museum, became a model for cultural institutions throughout Europe. The systematic collection and display of artistic masterpieces from across the continent, while ethically problematic by modern standards, democratized access to high culture and established new standards for museum curation and display that influenced cultural institutions for generations. The musical legacy of the Napoleonic period was equally rich and enduring. And composers like Ludwig van Beethoven, who initially dedicated his Third Symphony to Napoleon, before withdrawing the dedication in disgust at his assumption of imperial power, captured the revolutionary spirit and romantic idealism of the age in works that remain central to the classical repertoire. The military music that emerged from Napoleonic campaigns, with its emphasis on brass instruments and stirring rhythms, influenced the development of martial music throughout Europe and contributed to the emergence of the modern military band as a cultural institution. The philosophical implications of Napoleon's career continued to influence European thought long after his death. The tension between his rationalist Enlightenment ideals and his authoritarian methods of governance raised fundamental questions about the relationship between freedom and order that remained central to political philosophy throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. Thinkers from John Stuart Mill to Friedrich Nietzsche grappled with the example of Napoleon in developing their own theories about the nature of power, leadership, and historical change. The technological infrastructure that Napoleon developed to support his military campaigns had civilian applications that contributed significantly to the modernization of European society. The semaphore telegraph system that carried messages across his empire at unprecedented speed became the foundation for modern communication networks, while the standardized road construction techniques developed by his engineers facilitated commercial growth and cultural exchange. The systematic mapping and surveying projects undertaken during the Napoleonic period provided the geographical knowledge necessary for the railway construction boom that would transform European transportation in the mid-19th century. The legal scholarship that emerged from study of the Napoleonic Code influenced the development of comparative law as an academic discipline, while also providing practical models for legal reform in developing nations. The Code's emphasis on written law, systematic organization, and equality before the law became standard features of modern legal systems, while its synthesis of Roman law, customary law, and revolutionary legislation provided a template for legal modernization that was adopted throughout the world. The agricultural and rural development policies that Napoleon promoted had lasting consequences for European economic development. His encouragement of new farming techniques, his support for agricultural education, and his promotion of rural infrastructure development contributed to the agricultural revolution that preceded and enabled the Industrial Revolution. The consolidation of small landholdings into more efficient farming units, while often disruptive in the short term, created the agricultural surplus necessary to support growing urban populations and industrial development. As the gentle night draws you ever deeper into peaceful slumber, reflect on the enduring mystery of Napoleon's personality and the psychological dimensions of his extraordinary achievement. Modern psychological analysis of his character reveals a complex individual driven by an unusual combination of rational calculation and romantic ambition, of pragmatic flexibility and unwavering determination. His ability to inspire fierce loyalty while maintaining emotional distance, to embrace both democratic ideals and autocratic methods, to combine genuine intellectual curiosity with ruthless political calculation, makes him one of history's most psychologically complex figures. The medical and scientific research that has been conducted on Napoleon's preserved remains and personal effects has provided fascinating insights into the physical dimensions of his achievement. Analysis of his hair, clothing, and other artifacts has revealed details about his health, his daily routine, and the environmental conditions he faced during his campaigns. These forensic studies have contributed to our understanding not just of Napoleon as an individual, but of the broader patterns of health, nutrition, and environmental factors that influenced life in the early 19th century. The cartographic legacy of the Napoleonic period was equally significant. The detailed maps produced by his military engineers and geographic surveyors provided the foundation for modern European cartography, while the systematic territorial reorganization that accompanied his conquests established many of the political boundaries that persist to this day. The scientific approach to geography and territorial administration that characterized Napoleonic government influenced the development of modern concepts of sovereignty and territorial integrity. The maritime dimensions of Napoleon's legacy were complex and far-reaching. His continental system, designed to exclude British goods from European markets, accelerated the development of European shipping and maritime commerce, while also contributing to innovations in naval technology and navigation. The economic warfare between France and Britain during the Napoleonic period established precedents for maritime law and international trade regulation that influenced commercial relations for generations. The demographic impact of the Napoleonic period was profound and lasting. The massive casualties of his campaigns, estimated at over 5 million deaths, significantly altered population patterns across Europe, while also contributing to changes in family structure and social organization. The movement of peoples that accompanied his campaigns, soldiers, administrators, merchants, and refugees, created new patterns of cultural exchange and intermarriage that influenced European ethnic and cultural development for generations. The archaeological discoveries that emerged from Napoleon's campaigns, particularly in Egypt, revolutionized European understanding of ancient civilizations and contributed to the development of scientific archaeology as a discipline. The systematic recording and preservation of ancient monuments and artifacts that characterized the Egyptian expedition established new standards for archaeological research that influenced scholarly methodology throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. As you drift toward the deepest levels of peaceful sleep, consider the profound irony that Napoleon, who sought to create a lasting empire under French hegemony, ultimately contributed more to the development of European nationalism and the principle of national self-determination that would fragment his empire. The resistance movements that emerged in response to French occupation developed ideologies and organizational methods that became models for later independence movements, while the administrative and legal reforms he imposed often strengthened the capacity of subject peoples to govern themselves effectively. The environmental impact of the Napoleonic period, while often overlooked by historians, was significant and lasting. The massive movement of armies across Europe led to deforestation, soil erosion, and changes in agricultural patterns that influenced European ecology for generations. The introduction of new crops and farming techniques, often as a result of military necessity, contributed to agricultural diversification that had long-term environmental consequences. The final saga of Napoleon's influence extends into our own time, as scholars, leaders, and ordinary citizens continue to grapple with the meaning and implications of his extraordinary career. Modern leadership studies draw extensively on Napoleon's example in examining the psychology of power and the dynamics of transformational leadership, while military academies around the world continue to study his campaigns as examples of strategic and tactical excellence. His legal and administrative innovations remain embedded in the institutional structures of modern democratic societies, while his cultural and intellectual legacy continues to influence artistic and scholarly expression. In the quiet chambers of the Invalides, where Napoleon's remains rest beneath the magnificent dome designed by Jules Hardouin-Mansart, visitors from around the world come to pay homage to a man whose influence transcended the boundaries of his own era. The elaborate tomb, with its red porphyry sarcophagus, surrounded by sculptures representing his greatest achievements, serves as both monument and meditation on the nature of historical greatness. The inscription above the entrance, "I desire that my ashes rest on the banks of the Seine, in the midst of the French people whom I have loved so well," captures the essential humanity that lay beneath the imperial grandeur. The boy from Corsica who dreamed of glory achieved an immortality that transcends the grave, his legacy woven into the very fabric of the modern world. From the quiet chambers where judges apply legal principles, derived from his codes, to the bustling squares of cities, planned according to his urban vision. From the military academies, where officers study his tactical innovations, to the museums, where his personal effects rest in climate-controlled cases, his presence remains a living force in contemporary life. The stars that wheel silently overhead, unchanged since they witnessed his campaigns across the fields of Europe, look down upon a world that continues to bear the indelible mark of his extraordinary passage through the corridors of time. His story echoing through the centuries like the distant thunder of cannons that once shook the foundations of the old world and heralded the birth of the new.